Hello, everybody. Anthony Aniano here from RotoBaller Radio and RotoBaller.com with a look at your divisional round playoffs boom or bust plays to utilize in your DFS lineups. As we know, 4 games on the slate, 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. So coming out at you with 4 players to consider getting in your lineups this week for the ability to exceed their dollar value and give you that boom-like performance. And at the quarterback position, we start with Baker Mayfield. Once again, I used him last week. I'll use him again this week of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Detroit Lions on the road in a nice dome, weather not an issue, at the Detroit Lions. 6,000 on DraftKings, the cheapest of the 8 quarterbacks on the board. Now, if you are a member to RotoBaller.com and you signed up for their NFL Premium package, you'll know that DFS lineup optimizer has Baker Mayfield projected at about 20 fantasy points this week on DraftKings. And on DraftKings, like I said, he's going for 6,000. His high-end projection sits at about 27 fantasy points. His baseline projection sits at about 19.5. A higher projection than Jordan Love, per se, who's actually more expensive on DraftKings. This week, Baker Mayfield, on paper, has the best matchup for any quarterback based on the opposition's defense. The Detroit Lions allowed on the season 253.4 passing yards per game, the most of any of the 8 teams remaining. They've allowed 23.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, most of any team that is remaining. And they've allowed on the regular season 28 passing touchdowns, more than any of the other 8 teams remaining. So Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Cade Otton, you saw what they did last week against Dallas. I don't know if they win this game, but in the Dome in Detroit, it could be a high-scoring affair, and Baker Mayfield should be able to get his. And like we said, the least expensive quarterback on the board at only 6,000 on DraftKings. At the running back position, a boom or bust play that I like this week is Justice Hill of the Baltimore Ravens. 4,800 on DraftKings. RotoBaller's lineup optimizer has him projected at a low end of about 8.5 fantasy points and a high end of about 15.7 fantasy points. Over his last 3 games, his value comes in catching the ball out of the backfield. In his last 3 games, weeks 16, 17, and 18, he's combined for 18 targets, 11 receptions, 121 yards, and a touchdown. He looked fantastic. I believe it was 2 weeks ago, catching the ball out of the backfield for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Baltimore goes against Houston, who's super tough against the run, no doubt about that. 94.4 rushing yards per game allowed, 20.6 points per game in a PPR format allowed to opposing running backs. 11 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving touchdowns on the year allowed to the opposition's running backs. On this season, Houston allowed on average just under 5 receptions a game to opposing running backs, with about 35 receiving yards a game to those running backs. So if Justice Hill matches that normal, he's sitting at already at 8 fantasy points, some rushing yards, hopefully a touchdown, and he'll give you close to that high end of 15 fantasy points according to RotoBaller's lineup optimizer. And remember, only 4,800 on DraftKings gives you a little flexibility with other lineup choices. Same thing goes at the wide receiver position. If you're looking for a inexpensive wide receiver to be mindful of, take a look at Kalo Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Now, full disclosure, I'm all in on Buffalo right now against Kansas City in that matchup Sunday night. Shakir is only 3,800 on DraftKings, and with Gabriel Davis trending towards not playing, Stephon Diggs has been inconsistent, Shakir could be in line for another nice matchup. Now, in Week 14 against Kansas City, he only had 1 reception, but that Buffalo offense was healthier. Gabe Davis was active. Now, with him potentially out, and we're seeing it in Week 18, Kalo Shakir, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 105 yards. In the wild card game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 3 catches, 31 yards, and the touchdown. 19.5 fantasy points in Week 18, and in the wild card game, just over 12 fantasy points. RotoBaller's lineup optimizer has him projected between 7.7 and 13.8 fantasy points. He could be in line to be a go-to guy for Josh Allen if the Kansas City pass defense, which is excellent, no doubt about it, focuses on Stephon Diggs. That Chiefs pass defense has allowed, however, 11 wide receiver touchdowns and 27.7 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And finally, if you're looking for a tight end, I'm staying in Buffalo because the price tag on Dalton Kincaid is too good to ignore. He's only $4,800 on DraftKings. Yet, Dalton Kincaid, over his last 3 games, has 12 or more fantasy points. He has 21 targets and 14 receptions over that span. In Week 14 against the Kansas City Chiefs, Dalton Kincaid was targeted 8 times and walked away with 5 receptions. Now, at $4,800 on DraftKings, RotoBaller has him projected between 9 and 12 fantasy points. I think a touchdown gets him even higher than that. The Kansas City Chiefs on the season allowed 10.7 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends and allowed 4 touchdowns to the tight end position. So to recap, my divisional round playoff boom plays for your DFS lineup: quarterback, Baker Mayfield; running back, Justice Hill; wide receiver, Kalo Shakir of the Buffalo Bills; and at the tight end position, Dalton Kincaid, also of the Buffalo Bills. Folks, don't forget, sign up now for any of RotoBaller's premium packages, whether it's the in-season NBA or you're preparing for Major League Baseball. Use the promotional code ACES and save at checkout. Like and subscribe right here to the RotoBaller YouTube channel. Give me a follow on Twitter at Aniano Fantasy, and we'll see you next time right here on RotoBaller Radio.